That's good.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to this special session on psychological safety in the Asia Pacific by human capital realization. We're in for a treat tonight. We've got a presentation and plenty of opportunities for engagement. We've got a few polls coming up, so keep an eye out for those. We're going to ask for your opinion. My name is Daniel Brace, and I've been asked here to moderate the session and to help you make the most of it, really. So look, I'm here to respond to any of your immediate queries, so you can always address them to me in the chat box. And I'll also keep an eye out to make sure that everybody gets to have an opportunity to engage after the session. Before we go on, here in Australia we have a special tradition. It's to do with acknowledging our traditional owners or Indigenous people. It's a tradition that stretches back a very, very long time. It's the acknowledgement of country, which has just appeared there on your screen. What would happen in ancient times is before you entered into the land or the area of a tribe or a nation, you would wait at the edge of that, edge of their land, and wait to be invited in. And in being invited in, there would be a ceremony where you would state your intentions, that you were peaceful and that you would do no harm to the people or the lands. So it's a nice way to start, I think, especially on this session about psychological safety. So I'll just say the words there that I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hope of their people. And we do this, and we especially welcome any Indigenous or First Nations peoples to this session. We make special acknowledgement of that here in Australia, and it extends out, I think, across our lands. And with that in mind, we come here with a purpose together to talk about this very important topic of psychological safety. We're going to hear from Dr. Peter Brace, who I'm sure you've probably heard of. Here we go. There's a bit of bio information there. Peter is an accredited psychological safety consultant and co-founder and CEO of Human Capital Realization, a consulting firm that helps organisations across the Asia Pacific region to empower their enterprise by empowering their people. He's here on the screen. I hope everybody can see him. Just before we dive into that session, I'll just let you know that there'll be the presentation that Peter's going to give. And then at the end of that, there's hopefully be a bit of time for us to chat about it. I'd ask you if you wouldn't mind using the hand function, so you raise your hand or type your question in the chat box before, you can address that to me, to Daniel, and then we'll get through, as many as we can. Now, if we don't get to you, don't worry. We will be getting back to you after the session, and we need to keep this to an hour. So, there'll be an opportunity for a few questions. And when you're asking those questions, just be mindful that we're in a group. Maybe try and make them as broad as possible to include as many people. So I hope that's given you a bit of an overview about the session, and welcome to everybody who's joined us in the past few minutes. And we're going to hand over now to Dr. Peter Brace. Thanks very much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Great intro. Really appreciate that. So we're talking tonight, as you know, about psychological safety in the Asia Pacific region, and particularly how it relates to business success. But I don't want to do all the talking. I want to hear a little bit from you. I'm going to launch a poll just to get an idea of where we stand in relation to this issue. So basically we're asking, what do you know about psychological safety? So there's three options here. One, I've never heard of it before. Two, I've got some idea. And three, I understand it very well. So just to get an idea of the level of understanding we have, looks like most people, the vast majority, have some idea what psychological safety is. So 82% of you have some idea, and there's just a few who've never heard of it, and some who'd say they understand it very well. So that's kind of what we expected, and appreciate you very much answering that question for us. All right, so let's talk a bit more about it. Today we're going to cover, and for some reason, I'm seeing this very clearly on my screen because the poll is in the way. I don't know how to move that. Let me just try. Just bear with me for a moment. I apologize. Okay, here we go. Now I can close it. All right, good. That's better. Now at least I can see my own slides. Okay, so what is psychological safety? How does it drive performance? We'll look at the region that we all live in, the Asia Pacific region, and see what's unique and what's different about that with regard to psychological safety. We're going to look at some more practical tools and techniques for building it. And obviously in an hour, we don't have a lot of time to do that, but it'll be a bit of an overview and then a suggestion as to what the next steps might be for those of you who are interested in knowing a bit more. All right, so next slide. So basically, when we talk about what psychological safety is, it's about people in teams. And here's kind of a classic definition of it, right? It's the measure of how safe people feel. So it's about our feelings, not what we do, not what we think. It's about how we feel within our teams to be themselves, to learn, to contribute to the team, and to challenge. So in other words, challenging the way that the team does things, maybe even challenging the leader of the team. And we'll talk about different kinds of teams in a minute. So with that definition in mind, that it's a measure of how safe people feel within a team, when psychological safety is low, people, although they might be working in a team, they're basically working as an individual. Trust is low, and the members of that team tend to be self-protective. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And basically just do what they have to do, work only as directed. And I can imagine you've probably worked in a team like that. Maybe even now you work in a team like that. Let's talk a bit more about kind of how that develops and what it means. So when psychological safety is low, that's what we just talked about. But when psychological safety is high, people are working as a team. So they're not just in the team, they're actually working together as a team. Trust is high, and that means people will be self-supporting. So they're looking after themselves in that team. They're self-motivating. So they're basically driving themselves to produce results in the team, and self-directing. And this is probably the most important part of psychological safety here. People feel safe to be vulnerable, really to be open and to take risks. And in a team, the kind of risks people take, the kind of teams we're talking about, are risks to learn. And learning is an inherently risky activity because we're kind of putting ourselves out on a limb by trying something new. We're vulnerable enough to actually contribute. So if we have unique characteristics, skills, and backgrounds, it means we're bringing them to the team. And finally, we feel safe to challenge, which is probably the ultimate vulnerability in a team, right? So you're in a group, the group does things a certain way. If psychological safety is high, you feel safe enough to say, why do we do it this way? Maybe there's a better way, or this way is causing a problem, or there's a risk to someone else because of the way we're doing things. Maybe even challenging the leader of that team. So you can see there's a huge difference in the way people work between low psychological safety and high psychological safety. Psychological safety is not physical safety. It is not employee engagement. And it is not, although many people believe that it is not mental health. Now, all these things are vitally important. And what's so interesting about psychological safety is that it drives all of those important issues. So when psychological safety is high, physical safety is higher too. There are fewer incidents, there are fewer accidents, there are better outcomes for those the team is serving. Employee engagement is higher. People are more engaged with their work, with the team. Mental health is better because people have less stress and greater satisfaction in their work. And performance is better too, as you can kind of imagine. If all those other things are better, no doubt performance is going to be better too. So you might be thinking, how does it happen that psychological safety, which is just about how people feel working in their team, how does it drive all those very important outcomes? Well, if you're interested to know, that's what we're going to talk about now. So when you look into the details of psychological safety, it's really made up of two things. The first thing is our individual psychology, all right? So what we are like as an individual, you know, our traits, the things we like, dislike, the things that make us happy, which vary across individuals, you know, the things that, you know, motivate us. Again, they're different for different people, right? There's some commonality across all people, but psychological safety includes our individual psychology. And that's what makes it so powerful. But when you add into that how we work in teams, this is the two things that come together to make psychological safety low or high. It's the combination of our individual psychology and how we work in a team. And think about teams, right? A team is not just a group of people, right? A team is a group of people, two or more people working towards a common goal. And here are teams, right? A sales team is a team. A customer service team is a team, but so is a surgical team, right? A design team, a construction team, a department, you know, an HR department maybe, a group of executives, you know, the C-level executives, they're a team. The board of a company, they're a team because they're a group that comes together to work to a common goal. You know, something we've heard about a lot recently, unfortunately, a shift in an intensive care unit. They're a team. A police officer and their partner, they're a team, right? So psychological safety affects the way that all those kinds of teams work. So I think you're getting the picture that this is an incredibly powerful force in people working together. So individual psychology, how we work in teams, we kind of put that together and we call it, you know, it's a psychosocial phenomenon. And I'm not just using a long word there because I like long words. You know, you'll see why in a minute what's important about the psychosocial aspect of psychological safety. So what impacts it? Well, psychosocial, of course. So it's our individual psychology and how we as humans relate to others in a group. Now, humans have lived in groups for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years. And we've got used to working and living in groups. And it's something that's really important to us as humans, how we relate to others in the group and how we work together. And what impacts us, neuroscientists have studied this in great detail, and they've theorized that there are 5 psychosocial domains based on a combination of our individual psychology and the way we work in a group that impact our sense of psychological safety. And these psychosocial domains are listed here on the slide. Certainty, so that's about kind of knowing what's happening next in our group. So they're not unpredictable things happening. Autonomy is the feeling that we have control over what we do. We're not being micromanaged, not being told what to do at every step of the way. Relatedness is about how we feel in belonging to the group. So do we feel like we're part of this group, or do we feel we're on the outside? Equity, so this is the feeling that we're being treated fairly and that others in the group are also treated fairly. And the last one is our status, our significance in the group. Do we feel that we are important, that we matter, right? We may not be the boss of the group, but we have a status. You know, we feel that we mean something to this group. We have something to contribute. So all those psychosocial domains work together to either give us a sense of high psychological safety or low psychological safety. And the interesting thing about these psychosocial domains, they're part of the way our brain works. And if we feel a threat to our autonomy or a threat to our being part of the group, our brain and our body react in the same way as a physical threat. Now, one of the ways that I like to think about this is, you know, if you have some physical pain, right? So maybe you cut yourself, or you break a bone or something. If that's happened to you in the past, and you think back to it, you remember it, right? You remember it as an unpleasant thing that happened, right? But when you remember it, you don't literally feel the pain, do you? But something that has threatened your sense of being part of a group, your sense of being treated fairly, something that happened that threatened your feeling of value in a group, you think about that, you feel that pain again, don't you? You actually relive the suffering. So this has a tremendous impact on us when it comes to our work, right? Any threat to one of those domains in our work is really going to impact the way that we work. So just think about this. How does it feel when you're accepted just the way you are? Maybe, you know, there's something a little different about you. You're from a different background to those that you work with. Something makes you stand out a little bit differently. You have different experiences. But when you're accepted with those experiences and for who you are, you feel great, right? When those around you appreciate what you do, how does that make you feel? And when you're given freedom to decide how you do your work, you feel trusted, you feel acknowledged. That makes you feel good too. When you're treated fairly, when you feel like you're a key member of the team, it makes a difference, doesn't it? It makes a difference to what you do. It makes a difference to how you do it. And this is what we're talking about with psychological safety. This is why it's so important. And this is why I love to talk about it. So when people are working in those teams, right, there are all these different kinds of teams, and they have that feeling of psychological safety or not, it's going to impact the way that they work, right? So have a think about this as an example, right? When we're in one of those teams, working as a team, self-motivated, self-directed, feel safe to learn, to contribute, to challenge, what impact is that going to have? It's going to make sure that whatever the goal is of that team, we're far more likely to meet that goal. Let's look at some examples of that. Goals, you know, when we're talking business, we're talking about performance, right? Whether it's performance in terms of, profitability, whether it's revenue, whether it's patient outcomes, whatever it is. These key performance indicators are what we're talking about here. So think of a key performance indicator here, very simple one from retail sales, right? The performance is the sales closure rate. So for every time that a salesperson's talked to a customer, how often do they close that sale? How often does the customer buy, right? Really important for a retail environment. Very, very important. People may be measured on that. The store manager's probably measured on that. The area is measured on that. And if people are working together as a team, trusting one another, being self-motivated, self-directed, feeling safe to learn, to try different things, to contribute, to suggest new ways of doing things, what impact do you think that's going to have on the sales closure rate? Very likely to go up, isn't it? Think of another example. A surgical team. The performance they're looking for is a good outcome for the patient, right? Fewer complications, better recovery time, lower infection rates. If people at surgical team is working together, trusting one another, feeling free to challenge. Doctor, I think you may have missed this, right? Being able to do things like that, to learn, to try different things, backing one another up. One of the early researchers in psychological safety, it's a very interesting story, was doing research into surgical teams. And she looked at the level of psychological safety, and she looked at the number of incidents, safety incidents, patient incidents that were reported. She found that the higher the level of psychological safety, the more safety incidents were reported. Now, she initially thought, hang on, there's something wrong here. Surely the number of safety incidents should be lower when psychological safety is high. But when she looked into it further, she found that the surgical teams with higher psychological safety were reporting things that other teams were covering over. So they would report these incidents, they would be open about them, they would learn from them, they would make sure they didn't happen again. Whereas the teams with low psychological safety were too afraid to bring them up, covered them up, failed to learn from that, and therefore the patient outcomes, which was the most significant performance indicator, were actually worse for those teams. So higher psychological safety led to better patient outcomes, even though more incidents were reported. Think of the example of innovation, right? Key performance indicator might be a team that needs to think up a new product, a new service, a new line of business, right? Look at the little diagram here. So if a team is willing to admit their mistake, learn from their mistake, but also to experiment, take risks, share ideas, that team is going to be more innovative, make better decisions, and come up with more and more successful ideas. Because innovation always leads to mistakes, right? It's part of the nature of innovation. And if you're afraid to make mistakes, you will never innovate. So organizations that need innovation as part of their performance really need high psychological safety. I've spoken a lot. I need to ask you a question. What are the KPIs of your team, right? The team that you work in or that you manage. Let me put up a poll here. I've put a few examples here. Guys, all right, launch the poll. There are a number of different performance indicators here. Think about the team that you work in. You can choose multiple ones of these. Just give us an idea what kind of performance indicators are important to you and the team that you work in. Profitability, definitely. We're seeing staff turnover, customer problem solves, revenue, number of complaints, the fewer the better. Looks like we don't have any medical teams here. Oh, yes, we do. Someone's indicated patient outcome is important. In the chat window, someone might have put a, yeah. Oh, thanks, Daniel. You're dealing with some questions here. Really appreciate that. So we've got a huge range of performance indicators here, right? Revenue, sales, customer problems, they're very much an even split. Staff turnover is one, so I'm guessing we've got some HR people in the room. Can you folks see the results of the poll? Delivery success, that's a great one in the chat window. Hires per month is another one. Excellent. Okay. All these performance indicators are impacted by psychological safety. Oh, we can't see the poll. Maybe if I end the poll, can you see it now? Talking about this poll and no one can see it. That's not great. Can you, oh, share the results. Here's the button, share the results. I apologize. Here we go. Using Zoom for so long, I get things wrong. Okay, so I hope you can see that, the interesting spread of different performance indicators. So that's great that we've got a whole range of people from obviously different types of teams here. So thank you so much for participating in that poll.
Yep, we can see that now. That looks good. Yep.
All right, excellent. Thank you. All right, so now I need to get rid of the poll so I can see my slides again. Okay. Moment. Okay, so KPIs of your team. Thank you so much for that. So what we're trying to do here, let me just show you a little matrix. So here we've got a matrix. On the bottom axis is psychological safety from low to high, and on the left is performance from low to high, right? So it's basically we're talking about how we're feeling, how the team is feeling, and what the team is doing. And based on our level of psychological safety or our performance against those performance indicators that we talked about, you might be able to think, okay, where is my team? Are we performing high? Is our psychological safety high? Because it means a lot depending on what quadrant you're in here. So if you're here, you're achieving a lot, but you're under huge pressure, right? Psychological safety is low. People don't feel trust. They don't feel supported. They don't feel that their teammates have their back. They may not feel that their manager is really looking after them, but still they are performing. Can you imagine the impact that has on people, right? This is a stressful workplace. What about this one, right? People are feeling great, but not much is going on in terms of performance, right? So there's a lot of love, there's hugs, there's flowers, there's meditation, which is great, but performance needs to happen as well, right? So this is a low performance, high psychological safety. This is the box you definitely don't want to be in. You can fill in your own word there, right? This is where performance is low, psychological safety is low. You can't be in a worse place, but where we really want to be is here, right? Our psychological safety is high, our performance is high. That's where we want to be. That's where success is. So that's where psychological safety is driving high performance. I ask you where your team was. I'm not looking for an answer to that, just for you to maybe think about where your team is, the team you're managing or the team that you're in. So I guess the question is, right, I asked you, where are you now? And you might have a pretty good feeling for where you are, but is it possible to actually get some hard data about this and data for other teams? Great comment from Christian there, right? From the Air Force. So let's talk about the 2 steps in figuring out where you are with psychological safety. Well, first of all, it's a pretty simple question. You're asking people how they feel. So those psychosocial domains that we spoke about, do you feel like you have autonomy? Do you feel like you matter to this team, right? Do you feel like you have some status or significance? Do you feel like you belong to the team? So one way of doing this that we often use, there are many different options of surveys, to do this, right? Some are free surveys, some are paid surveys. Generally, of course, you get what you pay for. The example that I'm going to use for the results that I'll show you is the conductor survey, a PS25. It has 25 questions, 100% confidential, which is really important when you're asking people about how they feel at work, and takes about 3.5 minutes to complete. So let me show you a sample output of some results here. It's real results. Obviously, we're not saying who this organization is. But here we can see 6 teams, right? We've just called them manager 1 to 7. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 9. And you can see across the top those 5 psychosocial domains: certainty, autonomy, relatedness, equity. 2 columns on the left are the overall score for that team. And the one to the right of that LI is the influence of the leaders on that team. Now, psychological safety is shown green when it's high and red when it's low. And I think you can identify which manager here has a bit of a problem. Their team is feeling significantly lower than the other's team, particularly in the area of certainty. So it looks like this team doesn't know what's coming next, right? They have a manager who's maybe unpredictable in the way that they're dealing with their team. It's creating low psychological safety in a number of areas, but particularly in that area of certainty. It's a great piece of data if you're wondering what's going on across a group of teams, right? It's immediately you can see manager 4 is doing well, manager 1 is doing badly, manager 7 is doing well, except in a couple of areas. So you've got a lot of data here to work on. Second part of this, as well as asking people how they feel, connecting that to what they do. So if we are measuring the performance of a team, and pretty much every organization measures the performance of their team. I mean, in the Philippines, for example, there are many BPO organizations. They measure every detail of what their people are doing so they can measure performance, right? Every organization looks at that. So what we're trying to do is connect the answers to the questions about how people feel to the indicators of performance of that team. And using some fancy statistics, you can tell which connections are significant. Here's an example here, right? So don't worry about reading these questions. There's a whole list of the questions that have been asked in the survey, but the tick shows the question that relates to an indicator of performance. So just look at the one on the far right. The one on the far right is, I feel my manager trusts I will do what is expected of me. So this is a question about how much trust employee feels their manager has in them. And you'll notice that correlates to 2 performance indicators. One is customer satisfaction, and the other is sales conversion percent. And you can just imagine that. A salesperson who feels their manager trusts them is more likely to deal well with customers and more likely to close sales. So immediately you've got a connection now that you can see between performance and psychological safety. Here's a chart from a different organization with sales conversion, relating that to teams. And you can see some teams are in the stress quadrant. Some teams are in that oh dear quadrant, or whatever we want to call it. And other teams are doing well. So immediately, again, you can see difference. You can see potential for improved sales here. Finding this interesting. And here's another example where we've actually measured the performance potential. So the value of improving psychological safety can be seen here. The opportunity, you know, if you brought all the teams to the level of the highest team, you're going to make an extra 46.7 thousand. If every team falls to the level of the lowest team, you stand to lose nearly 72,000. Now back to this other example. I mean, what would you do once you've seen the results? I mean, you may already have thought of these. You look at what's manager one doing. What's causing that problem there with low certainty? What's manager four doing that's working so well? Which team is this that's doing well in psychological safety, that blue bubble, and yet their performance is low? What's happening there? Great data to work on. And once you find that there's some improvements to be made, what can you do? Well, I always struggle to say it's easy or it's hard, right? It's fairly basic, the things that you have to do, but I guess what is difficult is that in an organization where psychological safety is low, that's kind of the normal way of doing things. So you need to be persistent in creating new norms for the way the organization works. So teaching skills and techniques like how to listen more effectively, how to demonstrate empathy. If you have a diverse workforce, there's a big chance that those who may be different to others are not feeling part of the team, and you're not getting the best out of those people, and they're not really enjoying being there. So how do you bring the best out of everybody? How do you effectively question people and get feedback? Appreciative inquiry is a technique for when you're making major organizational change. What do you do about that? Camera in just one moment. Give me 1 second. So you need to work with leaders, you need to work with the members of the teams and more to improve psychological safety. So it's not a trivial task, although the individual tasks in it are generally fairly straightforward. Special role for leaders, right? Leaders need to set an example and be vulnerable. They need to show respect and ask input. They need to encourage conflict. So get people to challenge the norms of the team. Get people to come up with new ideas and actually make sure people who do that are protected. One more poll. I was going to ask everyone where they are, but we're a bit short of time. So let me just keep going because I want to leave time for questions here. So particularly, I just wanted to say for a few minutes, what's different about the Asia Pacific region, right? The Asia Pacific region is characterized in many countries by what we call high power distance. So this is where there's a big difference between those who are higher in status and those who are lower in status. It's difficult to challenge someone who is older than you, for example. Difficult to challenge someone who's in a more senior position to you. The highest power distance nation in the world is in the Asia Pacific region. It's Malaysia. Philippines, Indonesia are not far behind. Christian makes a great point. This is the trans authority gradient in aviation, right? It's extremely significant in aviation. So in a high power distance culture, it's more difficult to challenge, more difficult to innovate. But also in this region, there are teams that cross cultural boundaries. So a manager may be in a high power distance culture, the team might be in one that's lower. There's potential for misunderstanding, but there's also great potential for improvement. In the Asia Pacific region, respect is extremely important in all of society. Leaders fear that they lose control if their team is innovative and can challenge. So we've looked at this carefully and we've come up with a concept which we call respectful accountability. So what this does, it combines psychological safety with clear performance measures, which tends to reduce that tendency that leaders feel that they'll lose control because they can still hold people accountable. But with higher psychological safety, people don't really need to be controlled. They collaborate. So that's what we're aiming for here. So I just want to wrap up. You've been very patient and attentive, and I really appreciate that. And we want to deal with some questions here. I just wanted to mention that we're announcing today an online course, which I'm very happy to be delivering, a 4-week program about creating respectful accountability. It's specifically aimed at leaders and managers in the Asia Pacific region. It includes 4 weeks of video classes, worksheets, downloadable materials, and a live question and answer session each week, with the outcome being your own action plan for improving psychological safety in your teams. So we just wanted to mention that today. We will be sending out an email to everyone who's on this call, just to let you know how you can pre-register for this course. You get a special price because you're part of the foundation cohort. So watch out for that email next week. I have spoken a lot. I love talking about this topic. It's very important to me. I hope this has been useful. So we really want to open up now to some questions and answers.
Thanks so much, Peter. We're having a bit of feedback from the microphone, so I wonder if you might just, just maybe just give it a little bit of a toggle. Maybe toggle the. That's great. We've been having some great conversations here on the side as well, which has been really good. We've got a great summary there from Christian about psych safety is about having frank and fearless dialogue with respect and no incriminations. Mentions Amy Edmondson's TED Talk, which is great. And we've got a few people saying thank you as well. Now, do we have any questions? Feel free to pose them directly to Peter as well. And you can just unmute yourself, so long as we don't have everybody talking at once. That'd be great. I'm going to go on mute for a second. We're getting some more thank yous. Anybody got a query or a question?
I got a question.
Thanks very much. Who is that? If you just introduce yourself and then you can ask a question.
Okay, my name is Altaf Khan. I am from the beautiful Isles of Fiji.
Welcome. Thank you. What's your question?
Okay. I am a trainer by profession as well, and we are trying to include this as a topic of conversation to our learning and development programs here in my country. One of the biggest challenge and one big question that I have, which I want to ask, is how do you drive psychological safety in a workplace when the C-suite management, they have quite a big ego themselves, and they are the perpetrators of psychological safety in an organization? How can we manage this? And also, how do you manage like all these huge micromanagers out there?
Great question, and I really feel for you in that situation, but it's very common. What I suggest in this case is that you deal with what you can influence, right? And the best way to do that is to create psychological safety within the teams that you're part of. If you do that, and if you are measuring both psychological safety and the performance of those teams, you will produce results. And nothing helps people change people's mind more than results backed up by clear data. And the guys at the C-suite are very conscious of looking at data. Now we're losing my volume, I apologize. Is that any better? Can you hear me okay? Who's losing me? Oh,
Yeah, the sound, yeah, something's happened there. Just while you're going there, is Lisa still here as well? Lisa had a question.
Yes, hi. Hi,
Hi,
Daniel.
Lisa.
Hello.
How are you
Hello,
going?
everyone. Very well, thank you.
We'll just give Peter a little moment while you ask your question to change his microphone, so that hopefully that if you just hold on, Lisa, that'd be good.
Is that better? I've switched to a different microphone.
That's much better, much better. Thank you, Lisa. Yes, if you could, and thanks for the previous question as well, Lisa. If you wouldn't mind, just starting there.
Sure. Thank you very much. Really love the conversation and the presentation, so thank you for that. I do have a question. I'm working with an individual who's had a prior, I would say, very bad negative experience with a manager. And I've tried different techniques to reach this person, but I think I'm making headway, but at a snail's pace. And while I'm very happy for that, is there anything else that I can do to help accelerate? Everyone else on the team has seemed to come forward, at 180, but this person is really lagging behind. And, I tend to think that maybe this person is just embattled. And I want to try and reach out and figure out how I can support and help this person. But I've tried indirect communication, direct communication, positive reinforcement, etc. But nothing's really worked to the level of my expectation. I was just wondering if you've ever had an experience like that.
Is it Lisa? Sorry, I missed you.
Yes, yeah.
Lisa.
Thank you.
One of the great things about working, talking to people about psychological safety is that you come across people who really care. And you're obviously someone like that, Lisa. You care about this person. You're trying your best to help them. I guess what I'd say there is, what we talked about right at the beginning is that psychological safety is a combination of individual psychology and experience and the dynamics of the team. And if your team dynamics are great and the person's not responding, it really indicates that there's a problem that they have. And exactly as you said, it sounds like a really bad experience in the past that they're having problems getting over. Mm-hmm. So, it may be just a case of continued patience, or it may be the case that this person needs some additional professional help to maybe get over this. But, a supportive team enables people to be far more vulnerable and open, and hopefully that will get through to this person eventually. I hope that answers that question. So it's a difficult one without knowing the specific circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Peter, we've got a comment here, just scrolling up in the comments there from Larry about the importance of delivery in meetings, I guess, which must be maybe about training the trainers or training the managers. If you wouldn't mind just having a quick look there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find that call. Meetings are obviously, this is where teams come together, right? And this is where managers tend to have a great deal of influence over how people feel. So one of the areas to look at there is to make sure that people have the opportunity to contribute, right? If people feel that they're valued, they probably want to contribute to the meeting, but not everyone feels as comfortable as everyone else in speaking up, right? So ways in which people can contribute to meetings, perhaps outside the meeting. If you send them an agenda and ask them for comments beforehand, then those who don't want to speak in the meeting can, give you some written feedback which you could bring up during the meeting. So, trying to be flexible and adjust to what people are comfortable with, that really helps. I hope I've answered that question. Working from home, yeah, again, that same thing applies, right? Is everyone who's working from home and on that call, have they had the opportunity to contribute? And again, if they don't feel comfortable on that call, are you getting some contribution from them in some other way? Okay, looking at some other questions here. Is there any way we could predict how well an individual would create an environment of psychological safety during the recruitment process? Yeah, great question for management. So this is about, are people showing those characteristics of vulnerability as a manager? Are they willing to admit mistakes? How do they feel about learning? Do they have that mindset that shows that they'll grow and learn? That's a great guide to psychological safety. And I certainly agree, it is a topic that needs to be trained during new manager coaching. Absolutely. Are we seeing any other questions here?
We've got a comment there. Oh, sorry, who was that? Somebody. Oh, we had Danica. Have you got a question there?
Hi, hi, Peter. My question is because I lead the HR department. So with the new normal, the problem that I am seeing with other teams that I work with is that there's some, the responsibility and respectful accountability goes on the way of communication, don't you think? It plays a major role during people working from home because straightforward emails and stuff can be perceived on a rude notion or strong. What other tips can you recommend so that we can break the habit?
Yeah, so what you're saying is email communication can be misunderstood.
Yes.
Yeah, far more easily than a face-to-face call, can't it? And even easier than actually picking up the phone and talking to someone. So I guess to make sure within your processes for discussion that you have those face-to-face discussions, not just by email. And vulnerability is also about saying, I'm hurt by this message. It offended me, and being able to actually raise that with someone and to be able to have an honest conversation about it. In a team that has high psychological safety, it's not a team that's free of conflict, not at all, but it's about how the team manages that conflict. That's what makes the difference.
Thank you.
We've got an interesting one there in the comments about specific insights for New Zealand, for different countries, I suppose there, Peter.
Yeah, interesting. So if you look at power distance, which is, the steepness of the hierarchy in organizations and in teams and groups, New Zealand is quite low, right? So in New Zealand, people tend to be more equal. So psychological safety should be an easier thing to begin, right? Because you have less of a power gradient. It should be easier for people to speak up to their manager. It should be easier for people to challenge norms. But, still psychological safety can be low in an organization like that too. So exactly the same principles apply. The need to be training people in how they respond, how they're open, how they're able to challenge. And even when psychological safety is high, if it's improved, performance is still going to improve as well. Not sure. I hope that answered that question.
Now, Peter, I think that we're coming to the close of the session right now. Did you want to put up any contact information, perhaps if people had questions for after the session?
Thank you for mentioning that. I nearly forgot. Okay, so on this slide here, there's my email. There's my LinkedIn. We do publish a weekly newsletter, which is specifically aimed at psychological safety in the Asia Pacific area. I would encourage you to make a note of that. And we're happy to make these slides available to those who've been on the webinar. And hopefully our recording has worked okay. and then if I listen to it, I'll find out about that feedback. But we can make access to the recording available too. So take a note of those details. Sorry, Daniel.
And that's excellent, because I've had a few people asking already for those slides. So now I don't have to follow that up, which is great. Look, it's my great pleasure to thank you all for being here with us today, for engaging with, in a really respectful and interesting way with everybody. To thank especially Dr. Peter Brace. And look, the way I like to end these sessions is, because we're just going to log off, is maybe a bit of a wave. If everybody who's online wants to give us a bit of a wave, thank you very much. And we hope that you'll join us again in the future, or that we see you. And certainly best wishes from all of us here, Human Capital Realization, from now and into the future, okay?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Lovely to see you all. Wish you a great evening.
Thank you.
Stay
Thanks,
safe,
Peter.
everyone.
Great session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.